All right, we'll say good morning. Our daf this morning is Mem Zayin 47. We are picking up on Mem Bavam Beis 46b the Mishnah. Hamocheres atzmo v'esbanav la'ovdei kochavim. If a person goes ahead and sells himself and his children to non-Jews. Now, both say this would be a case of where a person owes money, so he doesn't have the money to pay the debts. He has a good cheshbon. What's the cheshbon? I'll sell myself into servitude, right? And I'll go ahead and work off the debt. And then what happens? He comes to the community, he says, "No, redeem me. Redeem me because look at me, I've been sold to a Gentile." So what's the halacha? Ein podin oso. We do not redeem him. We'll qualify this ruling in just a little bit. We do not redeem him, says the Gemara. But what we will do is, after the father who sold the family into servitude dies, we will go ahead and redeem the children. Says the Gemara, because we will say that the logic behind that seems to be is that the children didn't do anything. Right? The children aren't responsible for the decisions of their father. Therefore, the father got them into this mess. We're not getting them out of it, but we will redeem the children. Says the Gemara, Amar Ravasi, V'hu shemach Rabashana v'shilish. So we'll say this. So Ravashi comes along and qualifies the ruling and says, Ravasi, this is a situation where a guy is a habitual offender, meaning he always does this. He gets himself into financial trouble. He goes ahead and he sells himself off to the Gentile, and then he comes to the community to ask him to redeem himself. So if he's done this already 2 or 3 times, then ultimately, again, we are not going to go ahead and redeem him. But if he's a first-time offender, he got himself into trouble. Both say sometimes he look at themselves into trouble, and they think they know a good solution, and it looks good when they're trying it, and then they do it, and what? They realize, hey, this is not such a good idea, so then we'll redeem him. But if he's a habitual offender, then we're not going to redeem him. So the Gemara tells a couple of stories. Hanei b'nei machsi, diyas he's using kachavim. So we'll say there were these people from Biymay. Biymay is a place. A Jewish guy from Biymay. So the father used to constantly borrow money from Gentiles. He didn't have money to repay, and therefore asuvika garvu luhu. And therefore, what happened? They came along and they took the family. They took the family as servants in payment for the debt. So the father came to Rafuna, Amr lahu, Mai Avid lahu. So Rafuna said, what he wants from me? Because the Mishnah says, Disnan amocheres atzmo v'esbanav la'ovdei kochavim ein podin oso. So we'll say, again, so Rafuna said, what am I supposed to do? The Mishnah says that if someone sold themselves to ovdei kochavim, then what? Then the Maise, again, you can't redeem them. But we'll say, by the way, just so you understand, this is the continuation of the previous Mishnah. What's the logic over here? The theme over here is that we can't put the community in a situation where we are at the potential for always breaking the communal coffers. You can't do that. So meaning, if we constantly redeem every single guy who sells himself into servitude to a Gentile, you know what happens? You incentivize irresponsible behavior. Because then what it means is, I can borrow as much money as I want, even though I can't repay it. I'll go ahead, and what's the worst case scenario? The creditor will take me, and maybe even my family as slaves. It's no problem, because what's going to happen? The community is going to bail me out. The community is going to bail me out. But we'll say, so society cannot exist. We'll say this is actually very contemporarily relevant. Society cannot exist when individuals can think that they can make irresponsible choices, and the society, whether it's the government or whether it's the Jewish community, will come along and bail me out. That is the worst possible setup. We're living with a lot of that setup societally. You can't live like that because you will break communal coffers. That's the idea of the Mishnah. So this guy comes to Ravuna. Ravuna says, I'm sorry, I can't help you. The Mishnah says that if someone does this, we don't redeem him. Amaluhu Rabbi Abba. So Rabbi Abba was there, and he said, "L'maratani Rabbeinu, l'maratani Rabbeinu, v'hu shemach Rabashana b'shilish." So Rabbi Abba came along and said, "Rebbe, this is only if a person is a habitual offender. B'pashtos, this is this guy's first time offense, which means we should redeem him." So which the Gemara says, "Amarle hani margil regili da'avdi hachi." To which Rabbi Asi responded, no, this guy's been here before. Meaning he does this habitually, he is a habitual offender, and therefore I'm sorry, but we can't go ahead and redeem him. Hahu gaver de zabin nafshe leludoi. Both say there was an individual who sold himself to the ludoim. Both say Rashi says over here, ludoi uma she'ochlim b'nei adam. Cannibals. Now, not a good people to sell yourself to. Say he sold himself to, when we say he sold himself, what that means is one of two things. Either he borrowed money, defaulted, and was taken as payment, or literally again, he actually sold himself. He sold himself to them, got the money, and gave it to whatever, his family, or used it for himself. Also, Rabbi Ami, so Amrle, top of Memzayin Pirkon. So he came before Rabbi Ami and said, Rebbe, you have to redeem me. Now, I both say, now, obviously, in this case, the request is a little bit more acute. Why? Because if redemption does not occur, then what? Then Lemais, again, he's dead. So Amrle Tinan, Hamocher Atzmo Vespanalo Vikochavim, Ein Podinoso. So the guy, the way this Gemara seems to be read is that the guy is making his case. He's making his case ultimately again to Rabbi Amin. He's saying, Rebbe, look, I know the Mishnah. The Mishnah says that if someone sells themselves and his children to Ovdei Kochavim, we don't redeem them. But when the father dies, we do go ahead and redeem the children. Why, Rabbi say? Because we are concerned that if the children are living with the Ovdei Kochavim, with now the father's dead, there's no one there to blunt the Gentile influence, that what's going to happen? The children are going to be influenced, and Nebuch, they're going to go off the derech, and they're going to be they're going to abandon their Judaism. So we redeem them in order to save them. So the guy says, V'kol shekein hacha di'ika kitala. So the guy makes the case to Rabbi Ami, Rebbe, you certainly should redeem me over here, because you don't have to be choshesh by going off the derech. They're going to kill me. So this would certainly be a reason to redeem me. Amrli Rabbi Ami, Ha Yisrael Mumarhu, Tekachazule, Tekachil Nevelos Utrevos. So the rabbi said to Rabbi Ami, we don't have any obligation to redeem this individual. He is a Yisrael Mumar. He's Yisrael Mumar. We'll say he's an apostate. He's left Judaism. He's actively abandoned Judaism. And therefore, again, I both say, there's no obligation for us to spend communal funds on him. To which the Gemara said, Amaluhu, Ema lete'avunu deka'achil. Rabbi Ami said, well, listen, maybe the guy is what's called a mumar lete'avon. Or we'll say, a mumar lete'avon means someone who transgresses, but he doesn't transgress as a form of rebellion against God. Rather, he transgresses, why? Right? Because he enjoys it. Right? Because he gets pleasure from it. So we'll say there's a real big distinction there. Someone is a mumar lete'avon, is there, of course, a sinner, but at least, again, it's not a rebellious sinner, versus a mumar lahachis, which is what we call a mumar or a min. That's someone who sins with the intention to rebel. So Rabbi Ami says, I know the guy's a sinner, but maybe he's a mumar lete'avon. To which they said, Amar lahu, they said, Rabbi, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. They said to him, they said, Rabbi, I'm sorry. It's wonderful that you're being down the kafschus, but it's not the case, because there are many times when there's kosher meat and non-kosher meat, both readily available to him, and he willingly and knowingly takes the non-kosher meat over the kosher meat. Now, the only reason someone does that is as an act of rebellion against HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So such a person is considered to be a mumar lahachis, a min. Now, the halacha is that once a person enters that category, they leave the category of achicha, of your brother. Once they leave the category of achicha, then by definition, many of the halachos that apply to other members of Klal Yisrael will not apply to this particular individual. Amar lei zil lo kashavik lei da'afar kincha. To which Rabbi Ami finally has to respond to this individual saying, I'm sorry, you have to leave. The rabbis are not letting me redeem you. In other words, I have no recourse to help you out. I'm very sorry for whatever happens. Reish Lakish zabid nafshe leludoi. So Reish Lakish went ahead and, now this is actually very interesting. Reish Lakish sold himself to the Ludoim. Now, remember that the cannibals. So we're going to see Reish Lakish has a plan to wipe out the Ludoim. So he sells himself to the Ludoim. Watch this. Shakal ba'adei chaysa v'galgalta. He took with him a little bag, and inside of the bag was a large stone. Rashi says either a ball of stone or a ball of lead. But there was a hard object inside the bag. Okay. Amar, so what was Reish Lakish's plan? Listen to this plan. Gemiri diyoma basra kol debai minayo avdulei. So the Ludoim have an interesting practice, which is what they're both saying, that on the last day, right before they cook up a person, they give him his last wish. Right? Whatever you want, we'll give you. Why do they do this? So we'll say, so the Ludoim think that what's going to happen, if they give a person his last wish, he's going to be mochel. right? I'm mochel. You're killing me, but you gave me a great steak dinner. I'm mochel, right? So this is actually interesting. The Maharsha points out that they actually thought that if somebody went to his death a little bit more appeased, that the blood was sweeter. The blood was sweeter. Okay, in any event, they had this practice where the mice, again, the last day of life, they gave the intended party to be cooked his last will and testament. Yom Basra, they're right about to cook up Reish Lakish, and they say, "What do you want?" Amrulay, he says, "I have a simple request. Ba'ina, this sounds Ba'ina akmetinchu va'osavinchu v'chol chad minaychu amchei chaysu palga." Here's what I'd like to do. I'd like to tie you up. I'd like to sit you down, tie you up, and I'd like to hit each of you 1.5 times. Okay. So I'll say, so kamatinu va'osvinhu kol chad minayhu. So we'll say, so they listened, which is just fascinating. So they listened, and what happens? Kad mechaye chad chaysa nafik nishmase. Reish Lakish was a strong man, and when he delivered the first punch to each of them, he mamish nafak nishmase doesn't mean he killed them. Nafik nishmase means he knocked the wind out of them. Charkine l'shine. So the Ludan started, grinding their teeth at him, snarling at him, okay, very nice, you got a good punch, but we're right about to cook you. So Amarle achuche kamechayches. Reish Lakish said, "You're laughing at me." Akati pash lecha gabi palga dechaisa. I still have half a punch left. Remember, again, he said I get 1.5 hits. I still have 1 punch left. Katlinhu kulu nafak va'asa. So what happened? At that point in time, after the punch, he took out his bag that had the lead ball, the stone ball in it, and he hit each of them and killed each of them, killed the Ludim. So we'll say this is the story of how Reish Lakish wiped out the cannibalistic Ludim. Now take a look at Tosfos, just a moment, we'll say. Reish Lakish zabin nashi Ludai. Rashi says, Tosfos says, Kodem shechazar lemutav. So this is amazing. Remember, Reish Lakish has a very interesting story. Reish Lakish was about tshuva. Reish Lakish spent the early part of his life, not just a little bit off the derech. Reish Lakish was the head bandit, right? Reish Lakish was one bad dude, as they say, right? So what did he do? So Tosfos just points out, by the way, this is before he was chozer b'tshuva, right? This is before he became a rav. So in his youth, he decided, Zachariah, what do you think about this story? This is pretty serious stuff, right? Don't try this. So what happens? So he went ahead. This is before he became a Baal Tshuva, and this is when he was young. He went ahead and he did this. Tosfos says, because Lohaya mezalzel ba'asa kol kach. This is actually very interesting, because Tosfos says, once he became a great Talmud Chacham, so a Torah scholar, it's interesting. It's an interesting halach in general that a Torah scholar is not permitted to be mezalzel in his kavod. So he could be mochel on certain things, but there are certain things he's not allowed to do because his honor is not his. His honor is the honor of Torah. So Tosfos just pointing out, Reish Lakish almost would not have been permitted to engage in such a practice like this when he was already the Reish Lakish. Therefore, this episode took place in his youth. Just interesting. So the Gemara goes weiter. The Gemara says, yes, so once it's about Reish Lakish, the Gemara just tells about Reish Lakish in his latter years. Yosef ka'achal v'shasi. So we'll say Reish Lakish had very little money, and Reish Lakish had an interesting approach to money, which is that he spent what he had. Again, not recklessly or not needlessly, because he had very little to begin with, but what he had, he would use to eat, he would use to drink, he didn't save. So listen to this. Yosef ka'achal v'shasi. Amrli barte v'lo bo'es midei lemizgale. Father, do you not want to save a little bit of money to purchase a mattress to sleep on? In other words, Himamish had nothing, and yet he was spending his money on good food and drink. Amrle, biti krisi kari. Said, my daughter, my stomach is my mattress. In other words, so I fill up my stomach understanding that I'm not going to have money for the mattress, but it's okay. So kinach nafshe shava kava de murika. So we'll say when he passed away, all Reish Lakish left behind was a kav of saffron, Morika saffron. Karya nafshe, he used to say about himself, because what he used to say is people spend their lives trying to amass a fortune that they leave to others. So Reish Lakish says, the pasuk says about them, va'azvu la'achirim chelam. They leave their fortune for someone else. So it's actually a very profound Gemara. What Reish Lakish was trying to say is something fascinating. People spend their lives trying to go ahead and amass money to leave to someone else. And the amazing part is what? That when you die, You have absolutely no control over how that money is actually used. Now that Rabbi Silber was wise enough to know that sometimes that money that parents try to leave for their children sometimes becomes the greatest source of tension and discord within families afterwards. So again, Reish Lakish had his own shita, and Reish Lakish's shita was, you know what? I might as well enjoy it in moderation. And the truth is, the same way I blazed my trail in this world, my children will have to do the same. So the Gemara is not necessarily advocating for this particular approach, but it was Reish Lakish's approach.
We begin today's daf. Gittin, Daf Mem Zayin. We begin by thanking the sponsors. The sponsor of all the Talmud Torah for the month of Tammuz, Naftali Tilson of Telmond, Israel, in honor of the yahrzeit of his dear parents, Yona ben Avraham Leyb, as well as his mother Rivka bas Ya'akov, in the merit of himself, the entire Daf Chevra, and they should complete the Daf cycle in good health. Eternal thanks to Rabbi Silber, and the neshamas of his parents should have an aliyah, and the family should have a nechama. We also thank the sponsor of the week of learning, Tova NessAiver May. The Rav continues to be blessed with wisdom and understanding to teach and guide. Amen. We also thank Jacob and Julie Blumenfeld for sponsoring the week of learning nishmas, Jacob's grandmother, Henna bas Mordechai, Jean Goldman. The neshama should have an aliyah, and the family should have a nechama. So my apologies in advance, or maybe not in advance, but to those who were not here for Daf yesterday, we got a little bit carried away. We were so excited about the sugya of cannibalism yesterday that we went so far, we almost finished today's whole Amud yesterday. So we're not going to do it again, but if anybody has any questions on the Gemara from yesterday, I'm happy to answer questions as well. Maishi perhaps can send out the recording, not yesterday's recording. Baruch Hashem, we don't have that. But the recording of the Rav's daf from the previous cycle, for those who are not here. We're going to start today in Daf Mem Zayin with Aleph at the Mishnah, which is almost halfway down the Amud. Mishnah begins, Hamochar es sadeu l'oved kochavim, a person who sells his field to an akum, to ovdei kochavim, halacha is lokeach umevi mimenu bikurim mipnei tikun olam. There are two gersos. There are two ways to read this Mishnah. We're going to go the simple way of reading it, the way it appears in the Mishnah, and the way the Rashi seems to understand it, which is that we don't want people to be selling land in Eretz Yisrael to akum, to avdei kochavim. We'd rather the land in Eretz Yisrael stay in the hands of Yidden. And therefore, because of Tikkun Olam, because we want to ensure that the land of Eretz Yisrael stays in the hand of Yisrael, therefore, if somebody sells his land to an akum, then the halacha is every year he needs to go back to that akum who bought the land, and lokeach, he needs to buy from him the bikurim, the first fruits of that season, and he has to bring those bikurim to the Beis HaMikdash. So, and why is that? Because we want to keep the land of Eretz Yisrael in the hand of Yisrael as opposed to the land of Akum. Tosfos has another girsa, but ultimately we're going to go with this girsa that he has to go ahead and buy it. Now Rashi points out that he may actually have to spend a lot of money. If you look at Rashi, Lokech umevi bikurim, b'chol shana tzarich likach min ha'oved kochavim bikurei peiroseha b'damim yikarim umevi'am liyushalayim. So you have to understand, it's not only us, it's not only Yisrael, Yidden, who have value to the first grown fruits. Everybody likes to see the first grown fruits. Everybody wants to have the first grown fruits, and there's value to it. He has to reserve the first grown fruits every single year, and he has to pay a high price for whatever that new owner of the field is going to charge him to buy those fruits to actually bring the bikurim, the first grown fruits, to the Beis HaMikdash like he would do in any other year. Now the Gemara is going to go on to get into a very famous discussion that comes up in Shas a number of times. It's all in a lead up to get back to our Mishnah, but there's a discussion over here of whether or not a non-Jew who purchases land in Eretz Yisrael has the ability through that purchase to actually take away the kedusha, the sanctity of the land of Eretz Yisrael. What does that mean? That means that we know the living in Chutz La'aretz, because we don't live in Eretz Yisrael, if we were to do any type of agricultural work here, we are not subject to the halachos of Trumas and Maasros and the other land-related halachos. Land-related halachos really are reserved for Eretz Yisrael. Those are dinim specifically to Eretz Yisrael, and they are directly connected to the Kedushas Eretz Yisrael, to the sanctity of the land of Eretz Yisrael. The question over here is, if a non-Jew purchases land in Eretz Yisrael, does the fact that they own that land take away that special sanctity of the land of Eretz Yisrael? What's going to be the nafkamina? What will be the difference? The difference is whether or not they are obligated to still take off truma and meiser from what grows there. And one of the other points that come out, we're not going to get into this discussion today, but one of the very heated discussions that comes up every 7 years nowadays is whether or not the heter mechira in Eretz Yisrael during Shemitah accomplishes anything. Because if you're going to be of the opinion that a non-Jew who purchases land in Eretz Yisrael really does not remove the Kedushas Haaretz from it, then absolutely nothing happens when a non-Jew purchases the land. And this is obviously the main point. This is one of the main points that comes up in terms of the sale. There are other issues there as well, in terms of whether you're allowed to sell it and everything else that comes along. But the bottom line is, this is a very famous Shas sugya, and we're obviously going to connect it to our Mishnah. That connection doesn't happen to Mem Zayin Amud Beis, but we're going to start with another of other attempts just to bring the sugya out. Amar Rabba. Rabba says, Afal Pi. She'ein kinyan la'oved kuchavim be'eretz Yisrael lafgia midei meiser. In other words, he lays this down as a davar pasha to something which is simple. That an akum does not have the ability to be able to buy land in Eretz Yisrael and thereby remove the chiyuv to take off the meiser tithings and give meiser. In other words, because he owns the land, does not remove the kedusha from the land, and therefore whatever grows there, the produce that grows out of there, still is subject to the halachas of meiser, and meiser needs to be taken off and given to the appropriate places. Shenemar, how does he prove that? Where does that come from? For the pasuk says, Ki li haaretz. Li kedushas haaretz. He understands from the pasuk says clearly that the land belongs to me. And therefore, if the land belongs to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, me belongs to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, nobody has the ability to ever buy that land and take it away from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It means li kedusha sa'aretz, the kedusha is eternal, belongs to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and therefore nobody purchasing it has the ability to remove that kedusha. However, Rabbah says, Avo yesh kinin lo beit kuchavim be'eretz Yisrael lach barbo boros sichin uma'aros. Says Rabbah, while it's true that he can't remove the Kedusha, he does have the ability to purchase the land, and he has the rights to use the land to dig ditches, trenches, and other types of digging and use of the land. In other words, he has the right to use the land for whatever purpose he wants, but he does not have the right to actually use the land to remove the Kedusha from it. Shenemar, how does he know that the Akum is allowed to use the land for whatever he wants? Shenemar HaShamayim, Shemayim Lashem. The Shemayim, the heavens, belong to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. However, Haaretz, the land, Nasan Livnei Adam, was given to Bnei Adam, and therefore Bnei Adam, who have the land, have the rights to do what they want with the land. A Jew can sell it, a Jew can buy it, a non-Jew can buy it, a non-Jew can use it, and therefore, in terms of use, the Akum has no problem using land in Eretz Yisrael. Rabbi Elazar disagrees, and he says exactly the opposite. Even though a non-Jew who purchases land in Eretz Yisrael can thereby remove the Kedusha and is not obligated to take off the tithings of Meiser, Shenemar, for it says, Diganecha. The pasuk refers to the chiyuv with the word digancha, which means your grain. However, this yours specifically refers to yidin v'lo dagan oved kachavim. The only person who has to give meiser is someone who is digancha, you, referring to Klal Yisrael. But dagan oved kachavim is not chayiv in meiser, and therefore, if a non-Jew purchases land in Eretz Yisrael, he is not obligated to take meiser from the produce. Aval, he says the opposite. Ein kin le'oved kachavim be'Eretz Yisrael lachbo barbaros sichin umaros. He does not have the right to actually purchase land in Eretz Yisrael and use it for whatever he wants. Where does he get that from? Shenemar, for it says in the pasuk, La Hashem haaretz. The land belongs to Hashem. Actually, we just said it this morning in the Yom. Today's Sunday. L'david mizmar la'Hashem ha'aretz. Okay? Right. So just from this morning, we said it just this morning, and the land belongs to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and therefore, at no point in time does anybody have the ability to be able to do what they want with the land, because it belongs to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and for that reason, Oved Kechavim cannot use the land for whatever purpose they feel like. So very nice. We have a diametrically opposed machlokus over here. Rabbah says, well, it's true that an akum could buy land in Eretz Yisrael, and the akum can use it for whatever he wants. He does not have the ability to remove the kedusha. Rabbi Silber disagrees, and he says the opposite. He says that yes, an akum will not have to take off meiser, but cannot do whatever he wants with the land. So the Gemara asks the question, what is the subject of the machlokas? What are they arguing about? What are the points they're arguing about? Mar Savar, one opinion is, Rabbah's opinion is, Diganecha. Sorry, this is Rabbi Silber's opinion. Digancha v'lo dagan oved kechavim. The word digancha comes to exclude the grain that belongs to akum. And Umar Savar, Rabbah's of the opinion that you don't read the word as digancha, rather digunecha, which is more a description of the action of the digun. It's more of like a verb, which Rashi explains. This refers to miruach. V'lo digun oved kechavim. Now, the basic idea over here is person is not chayiv to give meiser until after miruach. Miruach is at the final stage when they smooth out the pile. At that point in time, that's when meiser is chayiv. So the way that Rabbah's learning it is digun chavlo digun oved kechavim, which means at that point in time there's not going to be any chiyuv. But before that, there is a chiyuv. Amarabba, mino aminallah. From where do I know this? It says in the Mishnah, haleket v'ashikcha v'apeya. Leket, shikcha, and peya are basically, peya has been leaving over the corner. Leket and shikcha is leaving over either stalks or individual bundles, either bundles or stalks that were left in the field. The halacha is that you can't pick them up. Now, the Mishnah says, haleket v'ashikcha v'apeya, if any of these forgotten things in the field, shall oved kechavim, that from an oved kechavim, chayiv b'meiser is chayiv and meiser. So the Mishnah sounds very clear. It says, leket, shikcha, and peya and peya of an oved kechavim, chayiv and meiser, ella imkain hifkir, unless he actually goes ahead and he's mafkir it, he makes it hefker that anybody who wants can come and get it. Now the Gemara does not understand what this is talking about. Hechitami, what is the actual scenario in this case? Ilema di Yisrael, if we're talking about a field that belongs to Yisrael, and now vilaktinu oved kechavim, the person who's he's harvesting the field, is an oved kechavim. So hold on a second. The field belongs to a Yisrael, and there's an akum who's actually doing the harvest. Elam kain hifkir. What does it mean when the Mishnah says, unless he's mafkir it, unless he actually makes the leket shikha and peya hefker, makes it public property? Hamafkiri v'kaimi. It's not his choice. The halacha is, if he by mistake leaves the leket, the shikha and peya in the field, peyas intentionally, but ultimately it's automatically going to be hefker. So what does it mean unless he's mafkir it? It's obviously going to be hefker. You don't need the akum to go ahead and be a mafkir it. Elolav, it must be to oved kechavim. The field must belong to oved kechavim. So this is a scenario of a field in Eretz Yisrael that belongs to an akum. And now, what's the case for Laktinu Yisrael? A Yisrael is one who's gathering. So now, Taima to Hifkir. The reason why it's not Chayiv and Meiser is because he actually went ahead and was mafkir it. Hello, Hifkir. If the akum would not have been mafkir it, Chayiv. In other words, the halacha is there's no chiyuv of meiser on something which is public property, on something which is hefker. So now the whole reason over here why it became pater is because he was mafkir it. But if he wasn't mafkir it, chayiv. So we see very clearly that the halacha would be under normal circumstances. If it was not hefker, then you'd be chayiv to give meiser even on grain that grows in a field that belongs to an akum. Gemara says, lo, made a mistake. It's not correct. Olam di Yisrael. Really, this is talking about a field that belongs to a Yisrael. And yes, and it's talking about a case where the non-Jew, the akum, is actually the one who is harvesting the field, is gathering everything together. Your claim was that if it belongs to a Yisrael, then it's natural that everything becomes hefker. Well, hold on a second. It's true that when the Yisrael was mafkir everything, he made everything public property that anybody who wants can come get it. He had in mind that if the Yisrael will come and pick it up, then it will become hefker. Would it actually become hefker? Was he actually mafkir it, having in mind that an akum will come get it? The answer is no, and that's the reason why we differentiate between whether or not he was mafkir it or not, which is interesting. It's not really a sugya for today, but the Gemara seems to indicate over here that the hefker, the leket shichon peah really only transfers to the property of the one who picks it up when he gets it. There are some differences that come out of that. Some say that as soon as it's left there, it's hefker, and anybody who wants can have it. Our Gemara seems to indicate that it's kind of waiting until the person comes to get it. When the person comes to get it is when the hefker status actually kicks in. That's why it depends who comes to get it. Tashema. The Gemara is going to try to bring a raya to this concept of yesh koch biyad akum, to go ahead and buy land in Eretz Yisrael. Is there the ability in the hands of an akum to go ahead to remove the kedusha from the land? Yisrael shalakach sadam yovad kachavim, a Jew who bought a field in Eretz Yisrael from an akum. Ad shelo hevi shlish. When did he buy it? He bought it before any of the produce that was growing there actually produced a third of its growth. Now, v'chazar umachra lo mishehevi ashlish. So he bought it when everything was like really at an early stage of growth. Now the Jew owns it, and under his ownership, what happened? It actually grew a third of its growth, and then he returned it. He sold it back to the akum. What's the halacha? Chayeves b'maiser. What grew in that field is chayev in maiser. Why? The Mishnah explains, shekvar nischayva, it already became chayiv in maiser during the time that the Jew owned it. So what does this clearly indicate? Nischayva in, lo nischayva lo. In other words, we have a case over here which is very clear. It's almost black on white. If an akum owns a field, and under his ownership it doesn't grow, then he transfers ownership to the Yisrael, and then it grows. And then the Yisrael sells it back to the akum. The halacha is that it's chayiv in meiser. Why? Because it became chayiv under the hands of the Yisrael. This seems to indicate very clearly that the only reason why it's chayiv meiser is because a Yisrael owned it. The Gemara says, no. What are we talking about in this case? Besoria. We're talking about a very specific area of Eretz Yisrael, because kibush yachid lo shmei kibush. This is talking about the area that David annexed by himself. In other words, he was the one who conquered these different territories, and Soria is just an example of it. Rashi says this is Aram Tova, but ultimately the halachas of Meiser in this area are different, and since we are following the opinion that says that this is not really a kibush of Eretz Yisrael, so it doesn't really belong to Eretz Yisrael, it's an annexation that works in terms of their ability to be able to use the land, but ultimately it doesn't give a kedusha as Eretz Yisrael, and it's for that reason that the halachas are going to be different, that only if Yisrael actually owned it, then it would be chayiv and meiser. But the halachas would be different if it was in Eretz Yisrael proper. So the Gemara says, okay, fine, we're going to have to leave that raya. It's not going to be able to prove anything to us about whether or not an akum has the ability to remove the kedusha from Eretz Yisrael and thereby exempt it from the chiyuv of meiser. Tashema, 2 lines from the bottom. The Gemara attempts to bring another raya. Yisrael v'ovid kuchavim shlach chusad b'shutvis. A Yid and an Akum went into business together, and they bought a field as partners. On the top of Memzayin Amad Beis, the halach is Tevel v'chulin mu'uravin zeh b'zeh. In every stalk of grain, or I should say in every kernel of grain, you're going to have a Tevel, which means you have grain that has not had the proper tithings taken off of it, and the other half of it's going to be chulin. It's going to be perfectly permissible to be eaten. Why is that? These are the words of Divrei Rebbe, because according to Rebbe, we're going to talk about Breira in just a minute, but just on a simple level, everything that grows belongs halfway to the Yisrael and halfway to the Akum. So you see very clearly that what belongs to the Yisrael is Chayav and Truma and Meiser. What belongs to the Akum is not Chayav and Truma and Meiser. Continuing in that brayso, Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says, no, Shel Oved Kechavim Pater. The grain that belongs to the Oved Kechavim is Pater and Meiser. Does not have to give Truma and Meiser. Shal Yisrael, when it comes to the grain that belongs to the Yisrael, Chayav, it's Chayav to give Meiser. Now, we essentially have a machlokes between Rebbe and Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, how we look at the grain that grows. Do we say that every single grain is halfway tevel, which means untithed grain, and halfway chulin, which means grain that does not have to have any tithings taken off? Or do we say what belongs to the Yisrael has to give Truma and Meiser, what belongs to the Akum does not have to give Truma and Meiser? And what's this machlokes? The Gemara explains, at Kadlo Pligi, their whole discussion, the whole machlokes is only Ella Demar Savar Yesh Breira, Umar Savar Ain Breira. They are having machlokes about retroactive clarification. It seems like we discuss this at least once a week at Daf Yomi. What is this? Retroactive clarification is when at the time that I actually divide something, or at the time that something comes into this world, I don't know who it belongs to. Later on, when we make the division, we'll find out which half belongs to the Yisrael, which half belongs to the Akum. Can we say that retroactively that's how it was the whole time? That's the machlokes between Rebbe and Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel. Well, Rebbe will say, no, you can't retroactively clarify what belonged to the Yisrael, what belonged to the Akum. And Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says, yes, you can. You can retroactively clarify which grain belonged to the Yisrael, and that's Chayav and Truma Meiser. And you can retroactively clarify which grain belonged to the Akum, and that's not Chayav and Truma Meiser. But it seems like everybody is of the opinion that what belongs to the Akum is not Chayav and Truma and Meiser. And that seems to be clear. Aval Tekuli Alma, Yesh Kinyin La'oved Kochavim, Be'eretz Yisrael Afkia Midei Meiser. It seems to be a very clear raya that the land that belongs to the Akum is not Chayav and Meiser, and therefore we should have a very clear raya to that halacha. Gemara says, no, again we're going to dismiss that raya by saying, Hachanami, here to Bisoria. We are referring to a specific geographic location in Eretz Yisrael, which was in Soria, which was not in Eretz Yisrael proper, because Savar and those Tanoim in that Mishnah are of the opinion that Kibush Yachilosh Me Kibush, that when one person goes ahead and does a conquering of a part of the land of Eretz Yisrael, that does not actually give it the Kedusha of Eretz Yisrael, and it's for that reason that it does have a lot of the similar halachas to Eretz Yisrael, but we're much more mekel, and therefore an Akum who owns land there will not have to actually give Meiser. Amar Rav Chia bar Oven. Rav Chia bar Oven says, Tashema, I'm going to try to bring a riot to this halacha, and this is where it comes back to our sugya. Hamocher Sadeu Loved Kochavim, a person who sells his field to an Akum, to a guy in Eretz Yisrael. What's the halacha? What's our Mishnah? Lokeach umevi bikurim ipnei tikkun olam. He has to go ahead and buy the fruits, the first grown fruits, back from that Akum and bring bikurim. Ipnei tikkun olam. Why does he have to do this? What does the Mishnah say? Mishnah does not say because the halacha is that the non-Jew has no ability to remove the chiyuv of bikurim. The Mishnah simply says because of tikkun olam. We want things to work out well, which is in this case we explained we don't want people to be selling land in Eretz Yisrael. Now the Gemara says very clear, hold on. Tikkun olam, what's the reason why we obligate the seller to go back and buy the first grown fruits? That is tikkun olam in. Yeah, it's because of tikkun olam. Midoraisa, from a biblical level, low. There's no chiyuv midoraisa for him to go back and out buy those fruits. So we should see, it seems very clear from our Mishnah itself, that the obligation for bikurim is only a rabbinic decree of tikkun olam, but not a biblical mitzvah of bikurim. That must be because ein kinyin la'oved kochavim be'eretz Yisrael lafkia. I should know the opposite. Yesh kinyin be'eretz Yisrael la'akum lafkia mikdushasa. Once the non-Jew buys it, he has the ability to remove the chiyuvim of Eretz Yisrael. The Gemara says, no, that's not a good raya. Well, it sounded like it would be a great raya. It sounded like this would be clear, like black and white. Gemara says, I'm sorry, it's not going to work. Amar Ashi, you're misunderstanding what happened over here. Shtei takanos havu. There were two different takanos that were relevant over here. Number one, Meikara in the beginning, Hevimaisi midoraisa. In the beginning, they went with the strict letter of the law of Doraisa, which was that, a Yid owns land in Eretz Yisrael, he sells it to a non-Jew. The halacha is, you must midoraisa go back and take those first grown fruits and bring them as bikurim. Now, kiven de chazu de kamikri umizbeni, people were saying, you know what? What's the problem with selling land in Eretz Yisrael to an akum? The kedusha stays there. We're still going to go ahead and bring all the bikurim. So big deal. We'll sell it. So the savri kedusha sayu kaiman. They said, you know what? Everything stays with the same level of kedusha. What could be what could be wrong with selling land in Eretz Yisrael? I have a good offer on my piece of property. I'll sell it. So therefore, takinu lahu, Chazal made a takana the low laisu. They should not bring bikurim. In other words, the impact should hit them. So Chazal said, we want to actually, yeshkach b'yad chachamim, lakor davar min TORAH. Chachamim have the ability to be oker certain mitzvahs from a Torah, because they recognize that there's a problem over here. So they said, you know what? If you sell your land to an akum in Eretz Yisrael, I'm hereby letting you know, from then on, there's not going to be any bikurim bro from that land. And that actually hits people with a thud. Like, oh my, you know what? That's pretty intense. All these years I owned this land, I was bringing bikurim, I made a sale, and look what happened to the land. It lost its kedusha. Now, kiva dechazu demandalo sagile mizbin v'kamashtakim biad ovid kechavim hadu takinu lev. What happened was, so for most people it actually worked. But you know what? When someone's strapped for cash, people start saying, you know what? I don't have enough money. People are offering me money for my land. I'm selling it to them. You know what? It will lose its kedusha. So be it. Now, at that point in time, they said, but you know what, now our takana is actually hitting us. Because we made a takana that people should not bring the bikurim because we wanted the impact to hit them. And then they won't sell the land, but they're selling the land anyway. So it's not working. So therefore, hadar takinu lahu delai. So they went ahead and made a takana that they should bring it. And that's where our Mishnah was talking about. Our Mishnah was talking about the tikkun olam in the second iteration of this takana. So again, we don't have a raya from our Mishnah that it's only midrabanan, and it possibly would have been midaraisa, but the takana that our Mishnah is talking about is the second iteration of the takana after the first one didn't work. Itmar. The Gemara continues. Now we're going to go on to another discussion. Hamocher sadeu leperos. What happens if a person sells his field, but he doesn't actually sell the actual physical field, rather he sells the right to use the field and everything that grows from the field. So now, Rabbi Yochanan says, Mevi Vikari. We're talking about Bikurim over here. The halacha is the one who bought the field. Again, he doesn't actually own the land. What he owns, the rights to everything that grows in the land. Maybe he brings Bikurim, Vikore, and he actually reads. When the person brings Bikurim, in the beginning of Parshas Kisavo, there's a whole discussion of what he has to read. He has to read Psukim from the Torah. So it says, Rav Yochanan, the person who bought the field for the Peros, he brings he brings Bikurim, and he reads the Parsha of Bikurim like everybody else, and it's a real full-fledged Bikurim. Rish Lakish says, maybe ve'eno kari. He brings Bikurim, however, he does not read the Parsha of Bikurim. Now, why not? We don't have that much in the Rishonim on our page specifically, but it's brought in other places. If you, the reason is, if you look at the Psukim say very clearly, I'm bringing the Reishis Priyo Adama, the first grown of fruits, Ha'adama, what grew from the land, Asher Nosata Li, that you gave to me. Rish Lakish says that's just not true. You can't say Reishis Priyo Adama Asher Nosata Li if you don't own the land. You might have rights to use this land, and you might have rights to the peros that grow from it, but ultimately the land doesn't belong to you, therefore he says not to read it. Now the Gemara explains, the Gemara is not explaining the pasuk that it comes from, but the logic. Rabbi Yochanan Amar Mevi Vikore. Rabbi Yochanan says he brings it and he reads the parsha of Bikurim. Why? Because kinyan peros kinyan haguftami. According to Rav Yochanan, when I buy something for the rights to what grows from it, it's as if I've actually bought the physical body as well. So if I buy a field for the rights of what grows in the field, so I buy the rights to everything that grows there, says Rav Yochanan, I essentially bought the field. Rish Lakish says, maybe he gets to bring of Eine Kore, does not read the parsha. Why? Because kinyan peros. Lav kinyan haguftami. When I have the rights to what grows in the field, that does not mean that I actually own the physical field. The Gemara is now going to try to prove one way or the other. Eisver Rav Yochanan Rish Lakish. Rav Yochanan asked the question to Rish Lakish. The pasuk says, Ula beischa, malamet she'adam mevi bikuri ishto v'kore. What is this referring to? So if you look further in the parasha of Bikurim, it says, V'samach b'chol atov, asher nasan l'cha Hashem elokecha. You will rejoice with all the good that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave you. And it says, U'leveisecha, and to your household, to your home. What does leveisecha, what does that come to add? In other words, V'samach b'chol atov, asher nasan l'cha Hashem elokecha, U'leveisecha. You'll rejoice with all the good that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave to you and to your household. What's the household? So says Rav Yochanan, Melamed sh'adam mevi bikuri ishto. Person could bring the bikurim of his wife. Ulebeisecha refers to his wife. Ulebeisecha melamed sh'adam mevi bikuri ishto v'korei. So you see very clearly that. Let's just understand. What does it mean that he brings from his wife? So we discussed previously in this Masechta, we learned this in Kesubis and a couple other places. When a woman gets married and she owns real property, there are two ways of dealing with it. There's either Nichsei Melug or Nichsei Tzom Barzel. But regardless, in any case, she owns the actual physical property and he does the work on it. So now in this case, she owns the property. And what does he have the rights to? He has the rights to what grows in the field. Still, what's the halacha? Ulubeisecha teaches me that when he is managing that field, he goes ahead and does the whole produce, he harvests it, he takes the bikurim, he brings it up to Eretz Yisrael, he's the one who reads the parsha of bikurim, and that's fine. So says Rabbi Yochanan, isn't that a pretty clear indication that if a person has rights to fruits, that he can actually bring bikurim, even if he doesn't own the physical land? Amar Le, Rish Lakish responded to him and said, Shani Hasam. You know why that case is different? Because the pasuk says, in such a case, he can actually bring the bikurim. But without the pasuk, I never would have known that he could bring it. Why? Because under normal circumstances, having rights to the produce of someone's field doesn't mean you actually own the field. Some understood this exchange went as follows. Shimon ben Lakish actually initiated this discussion. And he said, Rabbi Yochanan, the extra word, uluveisecha, teaches me that a person can bring bikurim from a field that is owned by his wife. Now, hold on. Says Rish Lakish, Hasam hu desiv lebeisecha. Specifically in that case, it says lebeisecha. Avol be'alma lo. But if you don't have a specific word in the pasuk to tell you that you can bring bikurim from a field that you don't own, but you manage, you would not be able to bring it. Amar le, tamadidi namimehacha. And he responded and said, you know what? I actually understand that the word lebeisecha is not specifically talking about a case of a husband and wife. It's an indication that any time you have a similar arrangement where there's a person who owns the field and someone else is managing it and has the rights to everything that grows there, the person who's managing it and has the rights to everything that grows there actually brings bikurim. So just a different way of understanding the pasuk. According to Rav Yochanan, the halacha is anytime a person has kinyan peros, anytime a person has the rights to anything that grows over there, then it's as if he owns the land. According to Rish Lakish, it's specifically one case where that works, specifically where it's a husband and wife. Eisve, the Gemara tries to bring a Aryeh to this case. Hayababa derech, a person who was on his way, ubikure ishto biyado. He has the bikurim of his wife's field in his hand. And Nebuch, the Shama, on the way, he heard Shemesa Ishto. His wife died. Now, what happens when his wife dies, aside from the fact that the family is going to be devastated? But her property transfers to him. He inherits her estate. So now, essentially, as he was coming up to Eretz Yisrael, his arrangement changed. But when he left his house, he was simply the property manager who had the rights to everything that grows there. On the way to Eretz Yisrael, he's actually the owner of the property. Now, the halacha is, maybe vikore. He could actually go ahead and bring it and read. Now, hold on. The Gemara says, it sounds like the only reason why he can actually bring the Bikurim and read the Parsha of Bikurim is because Mesa because she died and the property transferred to his possession, that's why he can read it. Lo Mesa, if she does not die, lo, he would not be able to read. So it seems to indicate clearly that before she died, he could read the Bikurim, but he can't read the Parsha of Bikurim. Gemara says no. Lo, huadin the afagav de lo Mesa. The truth is, even if she would not have died, we need to say this halacha specifically in this case. Why? I would think I would say that there would be a gezerah because of the halacha of Rabbi Silber. Why? Who is Rabbi Silber? What does he say? The Gemara says, Rabbi Silber teaches us, batzron v'shigron b'yad shliach. A person cut off the fruits and he sent them in the hands of a third party. Umeis hashliach b'derech, and the third party is bringing the bikurim, and Nebuch, he dies on the way. The halacha is, now the owner goes, he finds wherever the guy died, he picks up the stuff, maybe ve'eno kare, he brings the bikurim, but he cannot actually read the parsha of bikurim. Why? Shenemar, for it says in the pasuk, v'lokachta v'hevesa. He will purchase it, so he will take it, v'hevesa, and he will bring it. Ad shetia lekicha v'hava ke'echad. Kamash malon. Rabbi Silber taught us a halacha, which is that there can't be a transfer of property in the middle. You have to have one guy who does the whole thing. You take it and bring it. If in the middle you transfer jurisdiction from a third party to the original first party, whatever it is, the bottom line is, if it changes, then you can't bring it because it doesn't fit with the words of the pasuk. I would say that when a man is bringing bikurim from his wife's field, if she dies in the middle, it'll be exactly the same thing. At the beginning, it was her field. As he gets to Eretz Yisrael, to Yerushalayim, then it becomes his field. So there's a transfer in the middle, so therefore he can't actually read the Parsha of Bikurim. Kamash Malan, that is actually teaching us that no, that's not true when it comes to a husband and wife, and yes, he can indeed still read it. We'll go a little bit further. V'az do lutamayu. Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish are following their logic. The Itmar, before we learned Hamochar Sadeh was man shayovel noeg. A person sells his field at the time that Yovel is noeg. Well, now the halacha is that while Yovel, the Jubilee, is still in process, we still know the count. But while it's actually being observed, every 50 years, all real property goes back to its original owner. So essentially, when you buy land, it's basically a lease. You're leasing the land until Yovel will come, which is exactly the concept of a person who buys land for payros. Because if you're buying land during Yovel, you'll never really own the land. You'll have the right to use the land and anything that comes from the land up until Yovel, then you give back the actual physical property. So it's pretty much a parallel case. Rabbi Yochanan Omer, Rabbi Yochanan says, maybe vikore. What's the halach in such a case? Rabbi Yochanan says, as you'd expect, he brings Bikurim and he reads the Parsha of Bikurim. Rish Lakish Amar, Rish Lakish says, maybe ve'eno kare. He brings it, but he does not read the Parsha of Bikurim. Why? Rabbi Yochanan Amar, maybe vikore. Rabbi Yochanan says he brings the Bikurim and he actually reads it. Why? Because kinyan peiros, kinyan guftami. He's of the opinion that kinyan peiros, when I buy a field for its fruits, it's as if I own the actual physical field. Rish Lakish Amar, maybe ve'eno kare, because kinyan peiros, lav kinyan guftami. It's exactly the same discussion. Therefore, Rish Lakish says he does not recite the Parsha of Truma because it's not as if he owns the physical land. Now, the Gemara says, we have to actually have this halacha explicitly said in both cases. If we would have only said this halacha with regard to a person who buys the field and specifically articulates, I'm buying this field, I will not own the actual physical field, I'm just going to own the rights of what grows in the field. In such a case, maybe that's the only place where Rish Lakish is going to say, since it was so clear, it was so objective, there was no room to actually debate it. In such a case, you can't say he owns the physical property, because that's what he said. But Bahach, when we're talking about Yovel, a person actually bought the field thinking that he's buying the field. It happens to be the halachas, he has to return it. Maybe he's going to agree to Rabbi Yochanan. For only going to say the case of Yovel, then I would say the opposite. Only in that case where he actually buys the field, where he thinks that he's actually buying the field. In such a case, Rabbi Yochanan says that's where he could actually recite the parsha of Bikurim. However, Bahach, when a person explicitly says, I'm only buying it for the Paris, but not the actual physical field, I would say maybe he agrees to Rish Lakish, Sricha, and therefore we have to have both cases. Tomorrow's daf continues with this discussion. Everyone should have a wonderful day and a beautiful week.